Well, personally, I've heard all what I've needed to hear because the music and the worship has just been awesome, focusing in on this Jesus. And I'm going to be talking a whole lot about him, so it sort of comes together nicely. Now, some of you here are perhaps here, and maybe you're not even too sure what got you here. Maybe out of curiosity, you showed up by yourself because you're maybe interested in checking out this faith thing, this church thing, this God thing, this Jesus thing. And if that's the case, we're just awesomely happy that you're here and encourage you to push through. But most of you here have already made that decision. You've checked into Jesus. You've said, I'm in. And you're here to just continue to learn more. And I'm excited that the passages we're going to look at, John chapter 1 and 2, are great for whoever, because it's going to show you how to make the next step in really getting to meet this Jesus. And then for those of you that have known Jesus for years and years and years, hopefully it's also going to show you how to go deeper and discover more about him. I guess my desire is that we see a little more deeply how awesome and magnificent is this Jesus. How big he is, how infinitely big he is, transcendent he is, but also how, if you will, little he is, how he gets down at our level and gets very, very personal. So I want us to kind of open up our hearts to him and discover what it means to be amazingly captured by him and understand and worship him and obey him. So one of the convictions that I've kind of developed after tracking with him for quite a few years and being in a lot of different contexts and seeing my own life, I've just discovered how important it is for this, that it's only to the degree, and here's kind of what I hope we get out of this whole time together, it's only to the degree that we are captured by and love and even like Jesus, because we find he's pretty cool, that we truly come alive and become transformed and impactful. One of the dangers about Christianity in the church is we just become familiar, the familiarity with the stories of Jesus, the faith about Jesus, everybody talking about Jesus, singing about Jesus, but never having really met him, encountered him, and come to love him and be awed by him. And that's what he wants. That's what he wants us to discover. And that's what these two passages that we're going to look at, these two chapters we're going to look at. Because if we don't go beyond that, if we don't meet him, we just kind of become nice, religious people. And then if things go sideways, we just kind of quietly wander away. Or we crash and burn. So, but my deep conviction and also my excitement about this passage leads me to want to just share a little bit of my story, because it illustrates, just like so many of your lives would illustrate John chapter 1 and John chapter 2, I thought it might be helpful just to kind of find myself in this, because I do. So what I'm going to share, it might sound a little bit like a critique of a church, but it's not. It's just me sharing the experience, my personal experiences of it at that age. Well, nothing in my growing up years, early 20s, could have predicted that I would spend 50 plus years tracking with, walking with, and serving God in the States and around the world. My early exposure to Christianity actually did not help much with that. I grew up in a rowdy Irish Catholic family of 6 boys in the Chicago area. I was involved a little bit in church and catechism, but it didn't really help. What it gave me was a pale, unrelatable, distant, halo-wearing, heavenly Jesus. He was all tied up and kept in church, all wrapped up in layers upon layers of ritual, tradition, and comfortable demands. 2,000 years of history and Christendom had resulted in the taming of Jesus. Most national and church leaders reshaped him for their own ends. They declawed the Lion of Judah. So along with so many others, I walked away from that. I became your typical teenage and young adult goofball. Stacked up, by the time I was 20, stacked up 4 disorderly conducts. Had the chance to spend a few nights in jail. I wasn't bad, I was just kind of goofing off. Just wanted to have fun. I didn't study much in school, but I was an avid reader. As I look back on that part of my life, season of my life, I recognize that I was on a quest for two things. Number one, the ultimate party, and number two, an ultimate purpose. Now, no one who knew me would have thought under the surface, I'm looking for an ultimate purpose, but I really was. I was looking for something worth taking seriously, and I hadn't been able to find anything worth taking seriously, so I didn't take much seriously. But I'm looking around, I'm asking questions. Is there not life after death, but is there life after birth? Who am I? Where am I going? And so I found myself in a basement after there was a party going on. It's probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and everybody then went upstairs to eat. And I just stayed down there all by myself. It's kind of dark and a little bit of a beer buzz. And there was a song playing. And it was a song by Barbra Streisand. And the song is titled, Where Am I Going? And so I'm sitting there quietly, and I'm listening to these words. Where am I going, and what will I find? What in this grab bag? What's in this grab bag that I call my mind? Where am I going, and why do I care? Run where it's foul, run where it's fair. No matter where I run, I meet myself there. Looking inside me, what do I see? Anger and hope and doubt. What am I all about, and where am I going? Can you relate to that? Kind of just having these moments where you're just kind of wondering about this? Well, there I was, and I still wanted to keep figuring things out, so I continued to look, and I kept partying. And then about a year later, everything changed. I heard through some people. They shared about how in their personal journey, they had actually met Jesus. Not in some kind of a spiritual weird way, but they had had a meeting with Jesus, entered into a real relationship with him, beyond all the spiritual trappings. So later, hearing about their stories, and after pondering and wrestling with this offer, because they said, look, there's an open offer on the table. There's an open invitation for Jesus to enter into a relationship with him. So after pondering and wrestling with this offer, I said, in kind of a, not a real faith-filled prayer, but I said, okay, Jesus, if you're really there, and if you really want to have a relationship with me and come into my life and make yourself real, I'm up for it. Let's do it. And that's where I started. The adventure began, and I've never looked back. And these 2 opening chapters of John's Gospel give us kind of this unique portrait of Jesus, as well as giving us ways to enter into this relationship with him and go deeper into it. So we're going to look at these 2 chapters, and this is kind of the summary of what these 2 chapters are going to show us. In this, how do we get to know him, and how do we get to grow more deeply in him? First, we hear about him, or we hear from him, because whether you know it or not, he's on your tail, and he's always speaking to you. But at the very least, you're hearing about him. You can't grow up too much without hearing something about Jesus. But then you got to go to the next step. You have to meet him. You have to accept his offer where he says, I want you to know me, and I want to know you. And so you finally make that decision. Okay, I'll do that. And then he says, and I want you to follow me. So this is the order that we're going to be looking at here as we look at John chapter 1 and 2. We hear about him, we hear from him, we meet and encounter him, and then we follow him. So that's what this is going to kind of lead us to. That it'll open up our eyes to the gospel, to him, how big he is, and also how awesome he is. So the first thing we learn then, he's making himself available. We're hearing about this God and how big he is. And that's what John wants to do. Before starting it with all the biographical details about this Jesus, he wants to talk about first how big and awesome and infinite, transcendent he is. So he starts off with these 5 verses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. So this is his introduction of this one that we are going to learn later is Jesus, this transcendent one. And he says this, in the beginning. So the first phrase takes us immediately back to the very first words of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this is taking us back to the beginning of time, to the beginning of the universe, actually taking us back to pre-time. In the beginning, And he says, was the Word. But the word that's translated word is this word logos, which is a heavy-duty word back there in the Greek mentality. Here's a little definition of trying to explain what the heck they meant by this. So these Greek philosophers, this was their idea. Logos is a principle originating in classical Greek thought, which refers to a universal divine reason. It's immanent in that it's around us in nature, but it's transcendent. It's an eternal, unchanging truth, present from the time of creation, available to every individual who seeks it. So all these Greek philosophers are talking about this. And then John he takes that word and he says, in the beginning was the Logos. And then he goes on to describing this. And so what we learn then is, from his description, is that in the beginning, this word that he's talking about, this Logos, therefore, is pre-time. He's eternal. So this Logos is indeed eternal, even before creation. The Word was with God. So then this Logos, the Word that he's talking about, is relational, in a relationship with God already, back then. The Word was God, and so you've got the Word, it was God, and he's with God in the beginning. So we get a picture that in the very center, the very essence of God and the Godhead, there is a relationship. And indeed, we learn that there is a relationship of joy and love at the very heart of God's essence. And it goes on to say, and through him all things were made. And underscore it, he says, all things were made, and nothing that was made was not made by him. So he made everything. So he's giving us this huge picture of this one who's going to introduce us to later. So let's just look at the big. So he's created everything. So let's start with the big, like the universe. So whenever you step out in a dark night and you look up and you see all of these stars, you kind of go, wow. Years ago, here at News Story, Dr. Jennifer Wiseman came. She's an astronomer. She's a believer. She was the senior project scientist with NASA for the Hubble Space Telegraph. So you can imagine, telescope. You can imagine the pictures that she showed us of the universe, how awesome and unthinkably big it is. And she said, well, look, you don't start by wondering how many stars are out there. You think first how many galaxies are out there. Because we are in the Milky Way, which is one galaxy. But she said there are, in our observable universe, 10 billion galaxies. And of course, there's so many more. And each of these galaxies has billions and billions of stars. So just this picture of how big, expansive it is. And for them to measure space, they have to come up with this idea of light years. So a light year is the distance light travels in a year. And that's pretty big distance, because light travels at 186,000 miles per second. Whew. So that means in 1 second it would go around the Earth 7 times. So then that's the way that they measure, and it's unthinkably big when you get into these numbers. But we assume the fact, this is really big, this creation. And what John is saying is that this word created that which is unimaginably big, the universe. And so when you do that, when you're out there in a clear night, you go, and you've got to start thinking, where really did this all come from? Where is this? And so somebody as bright as our dear friend Einstein said this. Einstein was not a believer in the Bible, was not a believing Jew, was not a believing Christian, but he believed what he was able to see and calculate and ponder. And here's what he said. The soul given to each of us is moved by the same living spirit that moves the universe. So for him, it wasn't just this material thing that happened and is there mechanistically moving and held by gravity. He says there's a spirit behind this. We're talking about something spiritual. And then he goes on to say this. I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details. So pondering it, and pondering it with his brain, he says, this thing is a creation of somebody. So that's the big. So this logos, this word, created the immensely, unthinkably big. But he also created the little. This is a model of a cell. We can even go small if you want to go to atoms and quarks, but let's go with the cell. Cell is very, very, very little. And let's see, what does that represent, this cell? Well, this is a model of what it would look like. It looks pretty complicated. And I read this really great thing called the microscopic metropolis inside you. So this is worth taking the time to read. I thought this was cool, sharing it with you, because we're talking about the creation. So, at this very moment, where you're sitting right now in your body, electricity is zapping through your brain. Voracious killers are coursing through your veins, and corrosive chemicals sizzle in bubbles from your head to your toes right now. In fact, your entire body is like an electrical company, a chemical factory, a transportation grid, a communications network, a detoxification facility, a hospital, and a battlefield all rolled into one. That's your body right now, okay? The workers in each of these industries are your cells. Cells are the smallest form of life, the functional and structural units of all living things. Your body contains trillions of cells, organized into more than 200 major types. Can you imagine it? So who put that all together? I know, and John knows. And John's trying to convince us that's pretty cool. He says at any given time, each cell is doing thousands of jobs. Some of these tasks are so essential for life that they are carried out by virtually all cells. Then he goes on to say, others are done only by cells that are highly skilled for the work, whether it is covering up your insides, skin cells, preventing you from sloshing around like a pile of goo, your bone cells, purging your body of toxic chemicals, your liver cells, or enabling you to learn and remember, your brain cells. Cells also must make the products your body needs, such as sweat, saliva, enzymes, hormones, and antibodies. That's you. That's what's going on right at this precise moment. And somebody figured that out and calculated and created those little guys that's keeping you alive and keeping you breathing. And what's also cool is, every one of those cells, every one of these metropolises is able to recreate itself, reproduce itself. And it's doing that all the time too. So, amazing. So we go from very, very, very big to very, very little. And what's in between? What's in between is something else, because it says what he created. Here's what else he created. All these little creatures. This infinite, almost infinite number of a variety of animals, of species out there. And they're so funny. They're so colorful. They're so weird. They're so cute. Can you imagine the creator saying, I'm going to make them. I'm going to make him. I'm going to make him. And he probably laughed because they were so funny looking. You tell something, the author, the builder, the creator of something through their works. And the things that this shows us is amazing. And there's just a few more that you may recognize. The one on the lower right corner, he's one that probably hangs out with you a lot. And the Beatles said, all there is love. Well, this one has a little sign, all there is cat. And cats really can be a little bit self-centered, no? But all animals are just amazing. And so this God that we're talking about, this word, this logos, created it. But at the very, very pinnacle, people. God created people, created in his image, able to, when they grow up, to dream, to think, to imagine, to create, to write music, to write stories that break your heart, to dream, to hope, to love, to embrace, to impact. God created people. That's who created you. God made you. And that's kind of a good thing to contemplate. God made you. And there's something much bigger than biology behind you being here on planet Earth. Something really big and awesome and mysterious. And it's this one who's called the Word. So, that's just a little introduction John wants to give us of how big and eternal and awesome this God is. So he's told us, in the beginning, the Word was pre-time. The Word is relationship. The Word is divine. The Word is God. And through him, all things were made. So the Word is the creator. And then he goes on to say this, and in him was life. You want to find life? He is life. He's the essence of life. He's the source of life that he is describing. In him was life, And the Word is life and the light of men. So this is John's introduction to us of this God. So we hear about him, we think about him, we contemplate him. John says he's so big, you're never going to fully get it. He's so little and intricate and so creative, you're never going to get it. But you need to, because he wants you to get it, because he's going to show up. He wants to be known. The only way you and I are going to know the God who's really there is if he chooses to self-reveal. All these religions create their idea of God. God says, would you wait a minute? I'm going to show up. I'm going to show you who I really am. I want to be known, and I want you to be able to know me. So what John is saying here then, the light is going to shine in the darkness. The light's going to break into the darkness. The light, the Word, is on the move. And so the summary is, so this eternal, relational, divine, creator, source of life, light, is breaking into the darkness. And that's how we get to really meet the God who is there. And so he introduces us with this now shift to being able to maybe meet this God, get to know him. He's up there unknowable in his immensity, in his infinity. So he's going to now do something miraculous. The eternal God, the infinite God who created everything, is going to break into our space-time dimension and become finite so that we could actually know him. What an unthinkably impossible work of God. But he goes on to say, he explains here how it's going to happen. This word, this logos, is going to actually become flesh. And he made his dwelling among us. And we've seen the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So John's saying, we saw him. In another passage he says, we touched him, we ate with him, we danced with him, we had fun with him. And then he goes on to say in verse 18, no one has ever seen God, but God the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. And then the author of Hebrews, just to underscore this with exclamation points, says this. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. So in the scriptures, in the Old Testament. But in these last days now, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So his power is still at work right now, sustaining everything, keeping all the atoms together, keeping everything together in us, sustaining it by his powerful word. So he's the exact representation of his being. So if you want to kind of know what God's like, you look at Jesus, because he came for that purpose, to reveal what God is like. So as we're moving ahead, you hear about God, you hear from God, and whether you've been able to recognize it or not, some of the things going on in your head and in your heart, it's God talking to you, trying to get your attention, take you deeper, or maybe introduce you for the first time. And then you meet him and you encounter him, and that's what the next part of John chapter 1 is all about, starting at verse 29. Starting at verse 29. And this I call, this is kind of the infinite shows up at straight level. So when the infinite made flesh, made personal word shows up at street level, that's what John is now going to describe, starting at verse 29. So, John the Baptist shows up. He's a prophet. And he declares this, because he's got this following. And he's a little bit outside the fringe of the established, approved religion. And so those that were maybe not all that comfortable with the established, approved religion, they find their way to John, and they're listening to him, and he's preaching. And he's also sent to announce and to prepare the way of this one that's to come. And so they come across his path, and John the Baptist one day looks at somebody walking, and he says, look, there's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And then the next day, a couple of his disciples are right there with him, and once again, Jesus is walking by. And John says, there goes the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And these two guys go, what? What did he just say? He's Lamb of God? Huh? And so they see Jesus kind of walking away, and they go, let's check this out. So the two guys start following Jesus. And Jesus probably heard the pitter-patter of their little feet, and so he stops, he turns around, and he asks a most profound question. What are you seeking? What are you guys looking for? And they say, well, where are you staying? In essence, we want to find out more about you. We're really curious about what we just heard. And so his response to this, where are you staying? Kind of like, who are you? He goes like this, come and see. Come and see. This is his response. This is how accessible he is. He doesn't want to be this distant, theoretical, angry God up there in heaven. He is a God who's broken down into this dimension, make himself known, and he opens up his arms and he says, come and see. And so that's exactly what they did. So they followed him, they spent time with him, and in their interaction, which we don't have, lights started going on, and these are guys that understood the Old Testament, understood the promises, and they began to put two and two together, and they go, I think this is the Messiah. And so one of them is Andrew, and Andrew has a brother by the name of Simon. And so he goes and finds Simon. He says, Simon, I think we found the Messiah. Come on, let's go see. So he takes Simon to Jesus, and Jesus looks at Simon. He says, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Peter or Cephas. So Jesus, in meeting Simon, sees something beyond the current Simon. He sees somebody different. He sees somebody different. And so he gives him a name. And so in encountering Jesus, we encounter someone that says, come on, let's go. Get to know me. Come and see. And then in people that come to him, he looks at them and he says, I'm going to give you a new name. I see a new life in you. I see some new potential in you. So he begins giving new names, and that's just like when this church changed their name. A new story, a new life, a new beginning. And that's exactly what happens when you meet Jesus. He gives us a new name. He sees something in us, and he gives us a new name like he did Simon, like he did John. John was known as Mr. Thunder and Anger, and John became the lover, Mr. Beloved. So he starts on the inside. He sees potential, and he starts on the inside, and he gives us a new name. And that's, fortunately for me, it starts on the inside. It's not religious conformity, but it's something going on because God gets on the inside. And here's how I began to experience that. Just a few days after I made a decision, I asked Jesus, okay, let's get to know each other here. I got invited to go to a little event. And so went there, and these are all young people, and we're throwing the football around, and then we eat, and then they invite us to go into the room, and we get in the room, and we all get in a circle sitting on the floor. And somebody gets out a guitar, and they start singing songs I had never heard before, but they're kind of cool, personal, about Jesus and about faith and all the rest. And I go, okay. And then someone says, well, let's pray. And then several people just start praying, and they're not memorized prayers. These are prayers, just kind of natural expressions from their heart to this God that I'm saying, they seem to really know this God, the way that they're talking to him. And then someone gets up and says, okay, let's look at the Word. And so, interestingly, coincidentally, he says, let's open to the book of John. And of course, I didn't know where the book of John was because I had never had a Bible. But the guy next to me has one, and he opens it up. And so this guy then talks about what's in the Gospel of John. And I'm going, whoa, this is amazing stuff. I had been involved in an absolutely insane fraternity. I had been involved with knowing lots of people, having a lot of people, going to a lot of stuff. But when I left that event, I said, I've never been to anything where the connection was so real and meaningful and cool. And there was no drinking, which for me was unheard of, to go to something. I said, this is great. And so I just began, and then someone gave me a New Testament, so I started reading the New Testament. Here I am, I'm reading the Bible, and I'm devouring. I'm going, where has this been all my life? Things were changing. My vocabulary began to change. No one was telling me I shouldn't say those pretty words that I used to say all the time. I just began to say, yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable using those words. And then the thing that kind of really just knocked me off, if you will, what was normal for me. I'm in the student union. I'm at kind of this cafeteria, and hardly anybody's there. And across the way is a girl. She's very cute. And so I see her, and I'm there, and she's over there. And normally, I would have walked over and hit on her. Normally, I would have done that. But here's what's happening. I'm looking over at her, and I'm thinking, is she sad? Is she happy? Is she going through a hard time? I wonder what's going on in her heart. And then, I don't know what was going on. I started to pray for her. And I asked myself, where did that come from? So then I'm going, there's stuff going on in me ever since I made this decision to ask Jesus to come in and be a part of my life that's unexplainable. And that was just the beginning of that process. And that's what he wants to do in your life. He doesn't want you to become a nice religious person. He wants to allow him to invade your life, to introduce you to the fullness of life, to his love, and to show you what you can become. Let him give you a new name. Let him give you a new name and bring those changes, that new birth. It's a progressive process. And then Philip. Jesus meets Philip. And he says, Philip, follow me. Hang out with me, would you? He says, fine. And then Philip says, hey, I've got a good friend, Nathaniel. So he goes and sees Nathaniel and says, Nathaniel, I think we found the one that the prophet spoke about. This guy is Jesus of Nazareth. And Nathaniel, having prejudices like we all have, said, are you serious? Nazareth, that little town? Nothing good can really come out of Nazareth. But Philip, being smart, says this. He had heard this before. Come and see. So instead of arguing with Nathaniel, he says, just come and see, would you? And so Nathaniel and he are on their way. And as they're on their way, Jesus, Nathaniel, and he says, here comes an Israelite in whom there's nothing false. And Nathaniel kind of says, wait. How is it? Wait, you know me? And that's kind of the next thing that we discover when we encounter this Jesus. He knows us. Yeah, I know you. Well, how do you know me? And he says, well, I saw you when you were under the fig tree. So he knows us. He sees us. And he knows us on the inside. He knows us on the outside. And he says to Nathaniel, yeah, you're a mess like everybody else, Nathaniel, but there's something in you that I really, really, really like. And I would like for us to spend time together. I'd like to know you and you know me. Okay? And Nathaniel is just blown away. Because how do you know this? Boy, you must really be God. You must really be the King of Israel. And so Jesus says, so where did he say? Okay, he says this. Okay, Nathaniel, so you're impressed with that? And now you believe? He says, you're going to see greater things than that in verse 50. And in essence, here's the way I say it. Nathaniel, and he says this to all of us, you ain't seen nothing yet. Okay, so you're discovering things about Jesus. You're amazed by what you're reading and what you're hearing and what you're kind of experiencing. But he constantly tells us, hey, this is just the beginning. You ain't seen nothing yet. You think your life is changing? You just wait. You think you're discovering really cool things about life and about me? You just wait. We're on a journey, and you ain't seen nothing yet. So that's what it's like when you actually encounter this Jesus. And then finally, he says to everybody he's meeting, finally, follow me, follow me, follow me. And that's when it really starts to get exciting. That's when we really start to know him better and better. This is where we discover the characteristics that win us over, that make us not just love him, but like him. His tough love. He's a straight shooter. He tweaks the noses of the self-righteous and the pompous. He protects the abused and the accused. He's able to bend down to deliver a dying or demonized child, able to stand up to the tough, powerful, brutal Pontius Pilate, who was set up there by the Roman emperor. He's the faithful friend. He's the giver of humorous nicknames. He's the fearless one-man wrecking ball in the temple, condemning the scandalous money-making industry created by the religious establishment. And then you're faced with his incomprehensible, costly love. When you follow him, you're just discovering these things. He's the fullest, most beautiful expression of what it means to be human. He's what a man wants to see in a man. He's what any man or woman would want to find in the God that they could trust and follow. And so we respond to his call where he says, follow me. He says, follow me. And that's our ongoing process of tracking through these 2 chapters. We hear about him, We hear from him. We finally say, okay, I'm opening up. I'm open for you to come into my life, to reveal yourself, to do your work in me. And then he says, great. And then he begins to reveal those things to us. And then he says, follow me. Follow me. And it's in following him that indeed we begin to discover how absolutely cool he is. William Barclay said this. He said, this is when you start to follow him. That's when the fun really begins. He says this, Jesus promised his disciples three things: that they would be completely fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble. That's what he says he promised us. And that's exactly what's coming around the corner. So following him, John now gives us two clues. And it's interesting. After chapter 1 and all this discovery, then they start to follow him. And the first two experiences they have introduce us to the two clues of what's involved. There's a lot more in following him. Two clues, chapter 1, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. First, they go to a wedding celebration. And they go to this wedding celebration, and celebrations, they're fun, they dance, they sing. But here there's a need. They run out of wine. And this would have been a horrible blot on these people's lives. And so Mary, picking up the need for this reception going south, she goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, they run out of wine. He says, wait. That is not really the way I thought to start my ministry. But she just kind of turns to the servants, and I love what she says. She says, just do whatever he tells you. And so the disciples now, they follow Jesus. They're still kind of learning about what this is all about. And the first place he takes them to is a big party. And where Jesus transforms water into wine. So you've got to imagine they're looking at each other and they're going, thumbs up. We are into a good deal. They're probably giving each other high fives. Amazingly, following this Jesus, it's a big party. Well, what he's giving them a picture of, joy. You follow me, I'm going to introduce you to a level of joy and to celebrations and the community like you've never seen before. And that's exactly what happened. That's what this is a story about. Embracing joy. Joy is a mark of a believer. It was the mark of Israel. There were some, way back when I studied Hebrew, discovered there were 27 words for rejoicing in the Old Testament. No other language has so many words for rejoicing, because the Jews were always having festivals, because God wanted to have festivals so that they could celebrate his grace and remember his grace. And so joy was what it was all about. It's the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy. So, and eventually, there is going to be the great feast and wedding feast in the future, the Lamb, the feast of the wedding of the Lamb. And an image that sometimes I have is the music is already starting. The music is already starting in heaven. And little by little, maybe we can start to hear it and the rhythm of it and the music and the singing. And maybe right now, if we begin to hear it, we can start dancing to the rhythm and to the music. It's kind of like you have your own ear pods, and it's tuned into the feast that's coming, the great celebration of the wedding of the Lamb. So, keep the joy and the party going. To keep the joy and the party going, you got to do what Mary said to the servants. Do whatever he tells you. Because following him means step by step, you're following him. You're not following the commandments. You are. But ultimately, you're following Jesus. So when you look at obedience, not as obeying a law, you are obeying and following the next steps of Jesus. Because he takes a step this way, and you may want to go this way, but you go, but I want to stick with him. So I'm going to do it because I love him, and I want to follow him. So first is the party, and then a good fight. Because the next thing he takes them to, we're going down to Jerusalem, and down in Jerusalem, he goes into the temple, and he starts to clean house. He starts to tear things apart and throw up tables. And so these guys who were just high-fiving and really going like this at the wedding, they're now looking from behind the columns, and they're going, wait a minute. He has just made massive enemies. And if we're going to associate with him, we're going to be in trouble as well. He invites us into a good fight. There are a lot of bad fights in life. He's inviting us to enter a good fight, a good battle, a purpose that's going to help. He wants to remove things that are hindering people from knowing him. And that's exactly what was happening at the temple. And so he invites them to that fight. He fights for us. He fights in us. He wants to rearrange the furniture and get rid of some of the tables and turn things over in our lives so that this temple can become a true temple and not just a place of merchandise. He wants us to have an impactful, eternally impactful life. He gives us a challenge and he gives us a victory. He says, you're going to have challenges. He says, in this world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I've overcome the world. I've been victorious already. So, summarizing again, this is what we wanted to get out of this. It's only to the degree that we are captured by and love and like Jesus, as revealed in the Scriptures and in our daily walk with him, because we've got to be finding him and refining and rediscovering him in the Word. The Word is alive. Stick in the Gospels. Read it. Go back to it. Stay in the rest of the Word as well. But those Gospels continue to remind you who Jesus is. So as revealed in the Scriptures and in our daily walk with him, you're going to be discovering things on your own walk and with your eyes wide open as to the magnificence of God and his grace. That we truly come alive and become transformed and impactful people. That's the conviction that I have accrued over all these years of tracking with him. So here's where we were. You hear about Jesus, and you go way beyond that, and you decide, I want to meet him. I don't want to just be religious. I want to meet this God that I've been told. And you open yourself up to him, and he says, great, I've been waiting. I'm coming right in. And then we follow him. And then in following him, there's this ongoing growth. When following him, we hear more about him, and we meet him more intensely. And in following him, we see more cool things about him, and he's challenging us to be more involved and to serve him and to make a difference, to invite people to come and see, to engage the love that he gives you in them, to pass on to others and invite them to come and see. So what we learn about God through the incarnation. It's through the incarnation that we can hear something and discover something about God, but we meet him and encounter him at street level. But most profoundly, what has enabled us to meet and know God is this, what the Lamb of God did and came to do. He came to remove that ultimate barrier between us and him that kept us away from him. Sin does not make us bad. Sin makes us dead. If sin made us bad, then we could kind of, through religious practices or our kind of own moral strength, improve ourselves and maybe impress God so that we're going to get closer to him and he can accept us. But that is not going to work. We're dead, and we need someone to bring life into us. And that's what the Lamb of God did. And so this incredibly hard thing to imagine. Hard to imagine the incarnation, but even more difficult to imagine that the eternal, relational, divine, powerful creator, the source of life, would die. But he had to die to remove the death that was in us. This metastatic, spiritual death cancer that's in us. And the only way that we can be delivered from it is that he takes it and he destroys it on the cross by his death. The wages of sin is death. So either we're going to die or he's going to die in our place, spiritually. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And Jesus is that Lamb of God, the gift of God, who takes away our sin, my sin, so that the barrier that keeps me from life is removed. And so we discover this. The mystery of redemption, how dead humanity and the eternal holy God meet together. The infinite solution for our sin, infinite love for our soul. Let him be your lamb. Let him be your lamb.